One of my favorite things to do as a kid was to go hunting. And whenever my dad would come in and say, "Son, we're going on a hunting trip," man, it was like instant excitement. I loved to do it. We lived in the city, so in order to go hunting, he'd have to take me out in the country a little ways, and we'd get out there and we could shoot our guns or do whatever. Now, one time was really special because not only did he say we're going to go hunting, he said we're going to go hunting on your great-grandparents' farm. Now, I'd never heard, at least I'd never seen the farm before. I'd heard about it. That's where my dad grew up. But he said, we're going to go out and we're going to go hunting on this farm. I thought, great, finally. So we throw all our gear in the back of the Jeep and we pick up my uncle and my granddad, and we head to this little town called McFarland, West Virginia. And we drive a 2-lane highway there, and we turn off the highway onto this dirt road, and we wind up this dirt road. It was a real cold morning. There was frost all over everything. And then we come to my great-grandparents' farmhouse. Now, I'm not quite sure I knew what I was expecting. I didn't really know what to expect, but when we get up to this house, it looks like something out of the Blair Witch Project. And it's dilapidated. The weeds have grown up. They're hanging over this old rusty fence, and there's a gate that's just hanging off the hinges. The front porch is sagging down in the middle. There's an old barn there, and the walls are all rotten, and the roof is half blown off, and we make our way inside, and the windows had all been busted out. People had broken in. The stuff that was inside was tore up, and it was all thrown in the middle of the room. We had some cousins that lived there that were supposed to be taking care of this place. Apparently, they had just decided they had better things to do. My dad's not a very emotional man, but when we got up there, we got inside that house, and we were standing there in all that disarray, he said, "You know what? It breaks my heart to see this place in the shape it's in." And he looked down at me. I was about 12 or 13. He looked down at me and said, "You know what it takes to get a place in this kind of shape?" He said, "Absolutely nothing." He said, "You just neglect it, and the stuff will grow up, people will break in, and it'll be in total disarray." You know what? We've got houses, we've got cars in America, we've got a lot of stuff. But if we neglect those things, we're going to lose it. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. So what we need to know is, well, what do I not need to neglect? What's important enough in my life that it demands my attention so that I don't lose it? And we've got that answer. It's in Proverbs chapter 27, and we're looking at verses 23 and 24. Proverbs 27, 23, and 24. It says, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations." Now we're going to look at 3 things. We're going to first look at what did these verses mean to the ancient Israelites. Then we're going to look at, well, what did these verses mean throughout the ages, and what do these verses mean for us today? So what did these verses mean to the ancient Israelites? Well, it starts out by saying, "Be sure you know." And this is a rather emphatic command. In other places in Scripture, these same Hebrew verbs are translated, "know for certain something." So there's a lot of emphasis being put on this. And what is it you need to be sure of? It says, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks." Now, flocks, back at the time of the Israelites, it consisted of sheep and goats. And you may ask, well, what was a goat to an Israelite? Well, it was a lot of things. It was their source of food. It was a source of clothing. It was a source of milk. It was something they used for the atonement of their sins. They would sacrifice sheep at the tabernacle. And it was also a source of entertainment. You've probably heard a shofar before, those big horns you can use to blow through. So they used a goat for all kinds of things. They could even use it for money because they could sell goats and get more land. So a goat had a lot of resources. And then it goes on and intensifies this. It says, "Give careful attention to your herds." The only difference between a herd and a flock, a herd was a group of animals that was cared for by a single person, a shepherd. So a herd might be some sheep and goats and some cattle, but there's not much difference between a herd and a flock. And it goes on in verse 24, "For riches do not endure forever." Now, riches, you just heard from Isaac, They're the cattle, the sheep and the goats. That was actually the riches that are being referred to here. And it says they do not endure forever. If you neglect these things, if you don't pay attention, what you have isn't going to last. There were thieves. There were just the intensity they put on shepherds in Scriptures tells us the importance of tending to these animals, because if you didn't, there'd be a consequence. They wouldn't last forever. And it goes on and says at the end of 24, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Now the crown symbolized wealth and status in the Israelite community. And the Israelites knew very well that a crown didn't endure to all generations. They'd watched a crown that belonged to King Saul not continue on to his progeny. It transferred over to King David. So they knew full good and well that they couldn't depend on their predecessors and what they had. They may not get those things. So this is the picture you get in ancient Israel, that the most important commodity they had was their livestock, and it demanded their time and attention. So what has this meant throughout the ages? And really it's revealed in verse 23 when it says, to know the conditions of your flocks and give careful attention to your herds. They knew the Lord to be the source of all that they had. And it's revealed in Scripture. Moses talks about this in Deuteronomy 15:14. He's talking to the Israelites about how to treat your slaves when your slaves leave. He says, give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. He's acknowledging that what you have, you didn't get by your own accord. What you have is yours because the Lord gave it to you. And then Solomon himself, in Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verse 2, he says, God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing his heart desires. So God is the source of what we have. So God is simply saying, don't neglect the resources that I've entrusted to you. God says, don't neglect the resources that I've entrusted to you. Now it goes on in verse 24. It says, for riches do not endure forever. They have a lifespan. What God has entrusted is vulnerable. It's susceptible to outside influences. If you don't take care of what it is God's entrusted to you, if you choose to neglect it, you're going to lose it because it's not going to last forever. And the verse goes on in 24, and a crown is not secure for all generations. Have you heard of a woman by the name of Leona Helmsley? I see one person has. She was called the Queen of Mean. And she was a magnate, a real estate magnate in New York City. She owned the Empire State Building. When she died with an estate of $4 billion. Now most of that got donated to charity, but $12 million of that went to her dog. She had a Maltese. And she had 4 grandkids. 2 of those grandkids didn't see a penny of that. Now she said she was mad at them because they didn't name any of their kids after her late husband. But you can't depend on anybody in your family to give you what you think you may be entitled to, the family riches. These kids, unfortunately, Leona Helmsley's grandkids learned it the hard way.